Tēnā koutou katoa and hello everybody. Welcome to the Lentil Intervention Podcast. My name is Ben Adelberg and I'm coming to you from Tamaki Makaurau, Auckland. Tēnei ka mihi ki te mana whenua o Aotearoa. And we acknowledge the local tribal authorities of New Zealand.
And g'day, I'm Emma Strutt and I'm currently coming to you from Darrinbal country in Queensland. Before we dive into our conversation today, I'd like to acknowledge the traditional custodians of country throughout Australia and their connections to land, sea and community. And finally, if you enjoy this poddy, please like, share or comment on our social media and consider buying us a coffee to help support our work. Now on with the show.
Our last conversation was with freshwater ecologist and environmental scientist Chloe Price, and she touched on the impacts of our waterways, our streams and estuaries, all of which eventually lead into our seas and oceans. When it comes to Auckland's Hauraki Gulf, there is no person better equipped to dive deep into this body of water, literally.
That's right. So today we're so chuffed to be speaking with the wonderful Shaun Lee, an Auckland-based designer, illustrator and photographer. Originally working in web design and web media, Shaun went on to co-found one of Auckland's premier design studios, but he now dedicates his time to helping the planet. His environmental advocacy work is wide and varied, including serving as co-founder and trustee of Revive Our Gulf, which is New Zealand's only large-scale active marine restoration initiative, shining a light on the damage done in the Hauraki Gulf and with ambitious plans to reverse that damage. So, Shaun, thank you so much for joining us.
Kia ora, thank you. It's lovely to be here.
Shaun, just like Chloe, we only just met a few weeks back at the film screening of Toi Tui Te Whenua at Auckland University, and I had the honour of hosting the Q&A panel of which you were a guest. Limited time meant we could only touch on various topics, so we're certainly looking to this opportunity to explore the topics further, whilst also allowing you to take us, at times, on a visual journey. So, Shaun, to kick off, with every guest, we always like to begin with a bit of a backstory, personal journey. For you, diving, photography, creativity, those are your passions. How did you get into all that?
Well, I guess I always wanted to do Save the Planet stuff, and I had a sort of a plan to try and pay off my mortgage and then go and do Save the Planet stuff. So I'm a bit of a planner, and that was always the idea. But then when I was doing my biochemistry degree, I found that I was just drawing all over my notes. It was just scribbles everywhere and sketches and stuff. And I realized that working on the advocacy side rather than the science side was probably a better fit for me. And so I trained as a designer, got to have a pretty awesome career in web design and worked with some smart people and paid off my mortgage and turned 40 and had my midlife crisis, and now I've been doing Save the Planet stuff ever since.
Amazing. And there's a few areas, of course, we're going to spend more time on, but one of the initiatives that you've been involved in most is, have I pronounced it? It's an acronym, Most New Zealand. Tell us a little bit about that cool initiative.
Oh, well, I've always been a photographer, not really a filmmaker, and I love wildlife and nature and stuff. But I mean, one of the ways that we define whether something's alive or not is if it moves. So fundamentally, in so many ways, all my photos are kind of just dead. And so the idea behind Most New Zealand was really just to try and find a way to talk about New Zealand wildlife, but with moving photos. So if you go to the site and view it, like all the photos are kind of just like little video loops. And it was just this sort of idea for a web experience that was kind of bridged those two worlds. That was the idea. The term sort of Most New Zealand was just a way of kind of celebrating all the things that I think that are unique about Aotearoa.
I love how that website, it's absolutely visually stunning, by the way. So congratulations on this paying off so well. But I love how everything's been pieced together to help the viewer appreciate, the unique beauty of New Zealand, but also to understand the pressing concerns that are threatening that. So how did you kind of weave everything together for people to be able to understand it so clearly?
Yeah, it's a lesson I kind of learned very early on. You can't just sort of with your environmental advocacy, you just can't talk about all the bad stuff. You got to balance it with the good stuff. And so I sort of thought it was a vehicle and an opportunity to get both messages out, especially because I didn't have anybody editing me. I wasn't getting paid. I wasn't funded to do it or anything. And then it was one of the first projects I did after moving on from the business, and it was really successful. And I've used the same ethos through all my work. I try and always have that sort of the balanced perspective in it.
And I just want to go back to your creative work that you do, the paid jobs that's obviously paid the mortgage and pay for everything else that you do. But some of it is there's a bit of activism in there because you do support non-for-profits. You do, for you, we talk a lot about communication in science, and we've had numerous amazing, wonderful guests that just have an ability to take something so deep and you need degrees to understand and put them into words that the rest of us can understand. But something we haven't really, spent much time thinking about, even because I guess are all about academics and scientists and researchers. But from a visual point of view, how important is using visual to communicate science, communicate the impact of what's happening with our planet?
Obviously kind of biased, but I think it's really important. I think I had this experience where we were presenting the last State of the Gulf report, the 2021, to the Hauraki Gulf Forum, and I was sitting behind one of the forum members, and she was flicking through the report like it was the first time that she'd seen it. And she was just going through, looking at all the pictures, just the diagrams. It wasn't spending any time actually reading anything. And it kind of like it's often the summary or that first glance is what's the overview of the issue. So before you get into the nitty gritty, trying to present it at a really high level. That's where visuals do a really good job, but also sort of pulling out where you think the guts of the problem is and trying to tell that story. I'm always on the lookout for really good science communicators, like Mike Joy and Chloe, because a lot of those people, they know how to tell the story, and if I can find a way to just turn it to a picture for them, they can really appreciate that. So they're good people to work with, but you need the text as well. You can't do everything visual, but some things definitely work better visually.
And another website you helped create, which is also a really good visual medium for people that are interested, is New Zealand Tracker. So I imagine this website is invaluable for, any bird watchers or conservationists or citizen scientists, or even, just mums and dads wanting to get their kids more interested in the outside world. It's a pretty cool little tool for people to utilize. Tell us about that.
Thanks. Yeah. So I'm a what's called a doctoral minder. So going back to what I was saying before about volunteering. So one of the first things I did is I decided to put lots of time just on the ground doing this stuff. Like I didn't want to be like an armchair designer. I wanted to go out and do things and try and help. And so it was one of the first things I got sucked into was doctoral minding. And it's been incredibly successful. I'm really pleased, to call myself a doctoral minder, because we've kind of got this guerrilla network around New Zealand that has, turned things around for the species, which is really cool. It hasn't sort of been managed top down. It's been, sort of flax roots. And I helped organise the Auckland Doctoral Minders Forum, and a couple of years ago, this guy came and talked about the doctorals he was looking after, and he was really, really cool. And he was also a website designer guy, and I was like, we've got to work together on something. Like, I've got to work with this guy. And so we kicked around a few different concepts, and he came up with this idea, this problem actually, really that he was having, which was we kind of play beach detective as doctoral minders. You're patrolling the beach, you're walking up and down, and you're going, what's happened on the beach when I wasn't here, because you can't be there the whole time. So you might have lost a nest, you might have lost a chick or something like that, and you're trying to figure out what's happened. And so there were some good resources out there for different kinds of predators, but not all of them. And so we started sort of thinking about how the beach is basically a giant ink pad for us to play detective with, and all we needed to do was just create a really, really good resource that everybody could use to read beaches, and we'd be able to have all these insights. And so that was the idea behind NZ Tracker, and we're still building it. It's still a work in progress, but everybody's loving it and using it and getting a lot out of it, which is really choice.
I wonder if Harrison Tallarico is listening to this episode. We interviewed him 3 episodes ago, and he's based on Rakiura at Stewart Island, and working for Doc. And he's doing a lot of work on feral pest management, in particular looking out for the southern New Zealand dotterel, of which is roughly about 120, 140 left. So a lot of work going there. So it's almost like, we need to connect the two of you. You're working with the northern dotterel, and he's working with the southern. But amazing. I mean, so much, again, creativity in terms of the approach. And I think it just shows the importance of, when we talk about, it's almost like I'm wrapping up the show already. I'm not. But, when we talk about taking action, and for a lot of our listeners, it's okay, but that person's an academic, so they're good at that, or this person's good at this, and that's why they do that. How can I contribute? And this just highlights how it doesn't matter. Use your skill set in your specific way, and you can come up with a completely different approach of whether you're monitoring, reinstating, repairing, protecting, and so on. So this is amazing to hear, and like Emma says, it's amazing work that's gone into it. Now, you've mentioned beaches, you mentioned a little bit of the environment. One environment that you're very passionate about, an environment that you spend a lot of time in, you like to spend time outside, is the Hauraki Gulf. To our non-Aucklanders, what is the Hauraki Gulf? What does it entail? Tell us a little bit about this body of water, especially.
Yeah, so I started out, I did my first State of the Gulf report in 2014, and obviously I'm just a designer, just working with the science on communicating the state, and I was attracted to it, to the report, because the authors were really frank about stuff. They weren't trying to sort of be political and paint a rosy picture, and the Gulf is a really, really degraded water body. It's really had a lot of impacts over the last couple of centuries. And this graphic here from the last State of the Gulf report in 2020 sort of sums that up a lot. We've lost 67% of our seabirds and shorebirds. Rock lobsters have worse than this, and lost more than 76% of those. Pretty much lost all our seals and sea lions, nearly all of our whales and dolphins. Lost this one huge habitat called, green-lipped mussels, or kutai. Most of our sharks are gone and stuff. It's really, really just been absolutely hammered. And there's a couple of reasons for that. The main one is, there's two. It's overfishing, and it's pollution. So we're taking too much stuff out, and we're putting too much bad stuff in. And then I guess you put climate change on top of that, would be the other big threat.
To our listeners, just briefly, Hauraki Gulf, also known as Tikapa Moana, it's a roughly 4,000 square meter of body of water that encompasses the Auckland region, the Hauraki Plains, and Coromandel Peninsula, as well as Great Barrier Island. So it's a great big area of, I'd say, more the eastern part of Auckland region. And a lot of it is also encapsulated as part of the Hauraki Gulf Marine Park. Now, you talk about a lot of the impacts. Chloe touched a little bit about, I mean, her conversation was more on streams and estuaries and so on. So I guess more the terrestrial side of things. But in terms of, we'll touch on both, but let's first talk about the bad stuff going in. What do you find are the biggest factors, or what are the biggest contributors to what's going in?
For me, the main issue there is just sediment. There's just been so much mud go into the system, and most of it's historical. So we've got a lot of legacy sediments, but we're still continuing to put in too much into the system today. So I've got a slide up at the moment just showing how bad it is in some places, and just to talk listeners through what it's like diving in some of these places that have been heavily impacted by sediment. It'll look really, really lovely and rosy on the surface, and I'll probably have pretty good visibility there. I might have, be able to see the end of my fins. But then as I dive down and get closer to the seafloor, all that mud that's sitting on the seafloor gets suspended. So it gets darker and darker and darker. And usually by the time I'm sort of a meter away from the seafloor, I've got my hand stretched out in front of me and I can't see the end of my hand. And then I can't feel when my hand hits the seafloor because it's kind of like soup. And you can't even take a photo there to show people what it's like. It's just so gross. And so we've got some really, really bad spots in the Hauraki Gulf that have just been really, 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 really badly degraded. I've got another photo here just showing me with my arm buried in the seafloor there, and you can see it's up, well past my elbow. And what I'm doing there is I'm actually fishing around on the bottom of the seafloor, and what I can do is I can find lots of shells down there, which is really sad because it shows what the habitat used to be like, but isn't anymore.
So you mentioned all of this sediment that's washing in, but you also referred to the green-lip mussels before, and they're obviously important for filtering. But I know that they can be all along the seabed up until 50 metres deep. So I imagine it's not, a food that's harvested solely by divers. So how much has dredging contributed to the problems that you're seeing in the Gulf now, especially with all of that sediment also washing in?
Yeah, so it's quite tragic. What we did is basically at the same time as removing, as sort of flooding the system with all the sediment, we moved the ability for the Gulf to clean itself. So all of these shellfish that live on the bottom of the seafloor, they're what's called filter feeders. So they've got these, what they're doing is they're looking for food in the water, sort of pumping away, and they're sucking in that, algae and phytoplankton stuff as food. But when they do that, they also suck in sediment. And because they're community awesome animals, and they don't want to send that sediment on to the rest of their fauna, they grab it and they bind it up in mucus and stick it down onto the bottom of the seafloor. And what that means is they're actually cleaning the water. So we used to have more than 600 square kilometres of green-lip mussel reefs in the Hauraki Gulf, which is like an insane size to kind of imagine. I think it's like more than 80,000 football fields or something. It's just really, really hard to even try and imagine that. It's absolutely massive. And so there's all those little pumps, those filter feeding machines would have cleaned out the entire Firth of Thames in a single day, whereas the remaining mussels would take more than 2 years to do that. So really incredible little filter feeding machines. I like to think that if I invented a self-replicating filtering machine that could clean water like that, I'd win some sort of Nobel Prize or something. It's that's so cool. But yeah, what we did is we just completely didn't recognize the value that they had in the ecosystem, and we started dredging them in about 1920. The fishery just built up and built up and built up, and we pretty much removed them all. The fishery collapsed in the 1960s. So this is a graph of that here. And then what's worse is they knew that they'd stuffed up and they'd collapsed this fishery, but they didn't stop the practice. They went down south, did it in Marlborough, and then came back up and did it on the west coast of New Zealand as well. So what they've done is collapsed all these fisheries, but I think nowadays you'd call it ecocide, because what they did is they killed an entire habitat and removed that from the system, and we've waited more than half a century and it hasn't come back.
And what about the impacts of trawling? Because we're just talking about the mussels here, which often regarded as the kidneys of our ocean. But what about all the other species? Because in your first slide, you spoke about near collapse of a lot of other species in the Hauraki Gulf. So how have those been impacted? What's been the cause of those?
Thanks for mentioning that, Ben. There's lots and lots of different stuff that lives on the seafloor. Basically, you're either a photosynthesizing plant or you're a filter feeding animal. And those animals that form together and live in groups are what we call biogenic habitats. And here's a graphic I did for Doc that kind of went viral earlier this year that sort of described the values and a few examples of these different kinds of biogenic habitats. And I'll just quickly walk you through a couple of them. We've got scallop beds, obviously mussel beds, tubeworm mounds. These are really, really amazing. I dived some last year that were kind of like the New Zealand version of a coral reef. Like they're sort of 80 centimeters up off the seafloor, and as you swim over the top of them, that's got these little polyps that are sort of waving around, and as you swim over them, they pull in like a little Mexican wave across the reef. Really, really stunning. Obviously horse mussel beds, dog cockle beds. We've got corals in New Zealand, they're just a lot smaller. Sponge gardens, bryozoans, sepiens, brachiopods, heaps of different stuff. And they're all vulnerable to bottom impact fishing. So bottom impact fishing basically is smashing down food and homes for stuff that live on the seafloor. So it's killing those habitats, and even if it doesn't directly kill every single thing that they smash into, they still injure things, making them vulnerable to predation and disease. And I've got a few graphics I can keep talking about bottom trawling impacts for a bit. In the Hauraki Gulf, it's really, really massive. Like they basically doing 21 times the length of all of New Zealand in and around the Hauraki Gulf every single year. And those trawl doors, they're basically ploughing the seafloor, making these big furrows right the way through it. At the moment, there's a plan to sort of stop some of this bottom impact fishing. But what our government's done is it said, okay, let's stop the recreational bottom impact fishing, which are these, really small little recreational dredges, but it's allowing all this ginormous stuff with these, big nets that are 10 to 30 meters wide. So it's quite hypocritical of our government.
So to clarify, this is still ongoing.
Mm-hmm. It's basically, I mean, the fight to stop bottom trawling in the Hauraki Gulf has been going on for more than 100 years. So it's a really long fight. That's been hard won. We've had some movement, like with large parts of the inner Gulf, you're not allowed to bottom trawl anymore. But we're just slowly trying to push them out of the marine park.
I was going to say, like, considering most of the area is marine park and we know how detrimental this is, how is this still allowed to continue?
Yeah.
Or is the marine park just a fancy, pretty term, and so we're a marine park, but the shitfuckery still continues in this space?
Exactly. Yeah. The shitfuckery means it's a paper park, and we really need to clean up our act. One of the things that not many people realize with bottom trawling is about the the sediment plumes that come up from behind the trawlers. So there's these giant clouds of sediment that are stirred up intentionally because they help scare the fish into the net. And remember, I was saying that you're either a filter feeding animal or a photosynthesizing plant. Well, if you're that filter feeding animal, you're going to get choked by that sediment and die. And if you're a photosynthesizing plant, you're going to get smothered by it and die. So these giant clouds of sediment are really, really dangerous and damaging. And a single trawl, just one of them, because of that sediment plume, the impacts of it are nearly as big as one of our biggest, marine reserves in the marine park. So just a huge, huge amount of damage. And the other thing a lot of people are talking about with these sediment plumes is the chemistry behind them. So when that sediment, which is all kind of carbon that's sitting on the seafloor, gets resuspended into the water, it's actually mixing with the oxygen in the water. So the carbon and the oxygen, because there's oxygen in the water, is what the fish breathe, right? That's how they get by. So you don't often think of oxygen being down there, but there's heaps of oxygen there. And it's getting mixed in and creating CO2, which is contributing to global warming.
So are we on track to create a dead zone in this area, or has that already occurred? Like, is it becoming hypoxic?
We definitely have problems with oxygen loss in the Hauraki Gulf, but it's not showing happening up in the outer Gulf so much because of bottom trawling. It's happening in the inner Gulf where we're flooding the system with too much nutrients. And it's really important to talk about nutrients, not just sediment, because what's happening is nutrients are really awesome. And we kind of, from a nutritionist perspective, you kind of think of them as a good thing, right? But what they do is they feed the system so much that we have these big algae blooms. And if there's big algal blooms and there's lots of fish to eat it, then it's great. But if there's not, then the algae die and they fall down and they land on the seafloor where they get consumed by bacteria. And then those bacteria, they go absolutely nuts and just consume all the oxygen on the bottom of the seafloor. And we are starting to see signs of hypoxia, of what we call dead zones on the seafloor of the Hauraki Gulf. And at the moment, it's only affecting the very smallest stuff. But yeah, it's the nutrients in the Hauraki Gulf are growing because of man-made fertilizers and stuff going into the system. And it's something we're really concerned about.
Do you think it's also exacerbated by the fact that, now I'm trying to visualize this, but I don't have a slide to portray this, but it's one thing having a straight coastline and all the rivers, estuaries, streams, and so on, they feed into the ocean and out it goes out to sea and get diluted. But when you look at the Hauraki Gulf, you look at the Auckland, the Waitemata Harbour, you look at the Coromandel, you look at it's almost like the body of water is what's surrounded by land. So each river and each stream and so on is flowing the sediments, the nitrates, the pollution, the PCBs, the everything, all the contaminants into the water. But instead of washing out, it would effectively hit land. But from that end is also coming more. So we're almost creating a more concentrated body of water and not flushing out as much as it should. And do you think that's what's also, it's kind of holding more of the contaminants, more of the sediments in a space? Do you think that is potentially a factor?
I think that's fair. It's one of the things that made the Hauraki Gulf just so amazing. Like the biodiversity in there, and the amount of people it could support and everything was just off the charts. Like we just have these massive workups, and where that would go for kilometers, long and stuff like this. The system, because it held those nutrients, was just incredible. And it can, even today, when the trawlers go out, when they do the scientific trawls and they come into the inner Hauraki Gulf and do the trawls, they catch 10 times more fish than, they have to. It's still, really, really awesome, just because the system is so much more productive than open ocean. But yeah, it's starting to turn on itself, and we've got these problems where the state's starting to change, and we're losing a lot of biodiversity because of it.
Now, wait, did you say scientific trawling? Is this like the Japanese and their scientific whaling?
Oh, yeah, don't get me started, man.
Please do.
every
No, please do. This is the
this
forum.
is
So
this
am I making a correct correlation here between the two? Like
oh,
scientific whaling. Oh,
absolutely.
we're whaling just for science, but
Yeah, it drives me nuts. I wrote a big angry blog post about it. It's the I mean, I was astounded as to how much trawling was going on for science. Like like when we count fish in a marine reserve, you can just put down a camera and count some fish. You don't have to hurt anything. Whereas for the fisheries New Zealand scientists, what they decided to do was bring in a trawler. This is like this big scientific research vessel, which is kind of cool and stuff. But then they're trawling with it and dragging the gear across the seafloor, smashing everything up. It's just horrific. And they catch like $1 million worth of fish, every year, and then they sell it to sort of pay for the work, I guess. And it's just like, oh, there's got to be a better way. I'm horrified by it.
it's like having scientific forestry. Let's go and knock down a whole bunch of
Let's
native
count the trees by cutting them down.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Honestly,
yeah.
and as New Zealanders, we're a country that's kind of supports Sea Shepherd. It's we're anti-whaling, and yet we're doing the same bullshit in our own,
Pure,
literally
clean
our own
green.
backyard. Clean green,
Kia
New
ora,
Zealand,
man.
yeah, welcome. How am I?
Yeah. It's kind of weird. Like the fisheries part of the way we manage fisheries in New Zealand seems to just sort of escape all of the other legislation and all of the other things that are quite sensitive and caring. Like we do. Like I mean, I wonder if it comes down to some of our values as New Zealanders. Like how we see the difference between how we see a native bird versus how we treat a native fish. Like there's just something fundamentally different there.
Well, when you look at how many fish species we have lost,
Mm,
I think there's your answer. And
mm,
I think it's also the fact that, well, fish you don't really see. For most of us, we don't see them. They're in the water. We're not in the water. We're on land.
mm,
So it's perhaps a little bit of that disconnect. But,
yeah. It's
it
something I'm
just,
getting more sensitive to as I get older. Like as a diver, I'm spending more and more time with these animals and kind of seeing differences in behavior and finding new ways to connect with them. And yeah, I would have thought I'd get more sort of desensitized as I get older, but it's not. I'm getting more sensitive to it. Yeah.
yeah, yeah. Emma? I'm fuming. I'm just, yeah, Emma, I'll let you go.
It's so frustrating because you've got such critical issues on land surrounding farming practices, which then creates the issues with freshwater estuaries, etc., running off into the sea, and then like practices are falling down there as well. So there's just so much stress on the system from start to finish, which is why we need to talk about Revive Our Gulf and the important work that you're doing. So tell us about the vision and the mission of this organisation.
I love the work that I'm doing with Revive Our Gulf. So I'm a trustee of the Mussel Reef Restoration Trust, and basically we're putting food back in the water, which is just such a bananas kind of weird thing to do. But we're trying really hard to rebuild those lost habitats, the greenland mussel habitats in the Hauraki Gulf. We're doing it because not just for the fisheries benefits, but there's so much more biodiversity associated with mussels, and obviously those clean water benefits that I talked about earlier. So 10 times more fish associated with mussel beds, heaps more invertebrates. So the fish that visit our reefs are not just eating the mussels, they're eating all the stuff that kind of comes with it. And I've already sort of talked through how the mussels filter feed and the benefit, the clean water benefits, which absolutely everybody's behind. A single mussel can filter, depending on the size of your mussel, up to sort of 350 litres or sort of a bathtub of water a day. So really, really huge benefits. And everybody just absolutely loves this idea. We've got like mums with kids, love it. Fishers love it. Government agencies love it. Everybody wants to see these things back in the ocean. So this is sort of what a natural mussel bed looks like, and you can see it's got fish and octopus and vertebrates and other shellfish like whelks and things, but also algae and stuff growing on it. There's just so much more going on in a mussel bed than on bare sediment. And this is how we do it. This is how we put the mussels back in. So basically, when the mussels we lost those mussel beds from dredging. Everybody poached mussels for a while, and then there was just no mussels. And then people figured out how to farm them. And we'd actually be really stuffed if it wasn't for the aquaculture industry helping us out. So it's a big industry. There's huge areas farming mussels in the Gulf. And what we do is we harvest a bunch of mussels, good-sized mussels that would otherwise go to a supermarket, and take them out on these barges in these massive 1-ton bags, and we basically just slowly let them out into the water, and they sort of lie flat on the bottom of the seafloor initially, and then we found out it mostly happens overnight. They all just kind of stand up, and then they all kind of knit together, so they've got these little byssal threads that they use to attach to one another. And then what happens is the next day after a mussel bed's gone in, if I go and try and pull one of those mussels away from the rest of its whānau, the other mussels that it's around, the whole bed will kind of start coming up like a tent. So pretty cool. And then they get a little bit less pretty over time. Stuff starts to grow on them, and we get more of those biodiversity values. And we're putting in hundreds and hundreds of tons of mussels in, and forming lots of big test beds in different places, and learning about what's happening, which beds perform better, which ones are growing faster. We've had a few small ones get a bit smashed, and we're working with the Nature Conservancy, which is also doing shellfish restoration in Australia and in the US. They've been really, really useful for the sort of global knowledge on how to do this, but we're really leading the way with mussels, and it's mostly thanks to Auckland University, who have got multiple PhD students working on this for years now, and we're churning through the science and figuring out how to do this.
Amazing. Now, just one question. Aquaculture, when we just mentioned the word aquaculture, in some areas, it's actually a problem. So, the first thing that comes to mind, salmon farming. We know that causes huge ecological damage. Now, when you talk about mussel farming, are there any risks? Are there any potential downsides to it? Or exactly due to their filtering nature, actually they're already starting their work as they grow in the farms?
Yeah, definitely pros and cons. When you dive underneath a mussel farm, it's not like there's mussels that fall off the mussel farm and they land on the seafloor, but those mussels don't look half as good as the mussel beds that we build. There's basically there's a lot of kind of what we call pseudo-feces falling down from the mussels on the mussel farms that kind of blanket the mussels underneath. So it's not great. But mussel farms, like every time the mussels get harvested, they're taking nitrogen, for example, out of the system. There's I mean, I personally think there's more positives than negatives to mussel farms. I definitely don't think the same thing about fish farming. And we've got a fish farm proposed in the Hauraki Gulf at the moment, and the hearings are on this week. It could be quite problematic because, and the main difference is that the fish have to be fed, whereas the mussels don't.
In the areas that you're remuscling in the Gulf, are these
I like that
completely...
remuscling. It's awesome.
Sorry.
Hitting the gym, bruh.
Gains. But are these completely protected areas, or can people come along now and harvest them and take them back out of the environment again?
Yeah, they could. And so that limits us on where we can put mussels down. So at the moment, we're putting them down in quite degraded areas that people don't want to go harvesting mussels. But that won't work forever. There's one of the cool things the government's talking about doing at the moment is introducing what are called high protection areas. It's kind of like a marine reserve, but in a marine reserve you can't do anything. You can't, pat the fish. Whereas with these high protection areas, we'll be able to do active restoration. So we'll be able to install mussel beds in some of those areas, which will really help us extend the range of sort of environments where we can put mussels in.
So would you say in general the government's been quite supportive of your work, or should people be writing letters here?
At the moment, we're getting a lot of financial support from Auckland Council, not really much from Waikato Regional Council. We've just got a Hauraki Gulf focused kaupapa or focus, which is those two councils. We got a little bit of a help initially from the Ministry of the Environment, but where I really think the government needs to step up is Fisheries New Zealand, who sort of responsible for losing the mussel beds in the first place, needs to start thinking about initiating its own restoration program. So, for example, they're allowing techniques to smash and kill all of those different species that live on the seafloor that I talked about earlier, but at the moment they have no idea on how to put those back, and so they need to progress science on that, and then so they know how to return those habitats if they're going to keep smashing them, and then also actually just start doing it in places that they've damaged, because the commercial companies aren't going to do it. They just come in, extract, and leave.
So it's a lot of amazing work that you're doing here with Revive Our Reef and the entity and the organization. But for our listeners, as individuals passionate about the water, especially those that like spending time in the water, like myself, what can we as individuals be doing to either contribute to the restoration or, what can we be doing?
I don't eat mussels myself, but if you buy mussels, you're supporting the industry and you're kind of helping us, I guess. But you can go and check out the Revive Our Gulf webpage and sort of get behind the idea and share the idea. At the moment, we're really iwi-led, so a lot of community groups ask us to do restoration in the area, but we're kind of being a bit more driven by iwi on where we're going to do restoration on the seafloor. There are lots of citizen science things you can do to help with the ocean. Obviously everything from picking up plastic and stuff, but one of my favorite things to do, and calling in pollution, that's a big one. I do a lot of that. But one of my favorite things to do as a citizen science is just to log what's where, because, just going back to your earlier point, Ben, about not knowing, not appreciating stuff because we can't see it. If you do go for a snorkel, take a GoPro with you, identify species, upload it to iNaturalist.org.nz, and show people what's where so that we can plan and protect stuff better.
Amazing. Look, I think most of us will agree that we love picture books over words, and I think that the same goes for a lot of other means of communicating. A lot of people are visual, but as the saying goes, a picture paints 1,000 words. And as the little snippets of your presentation have shown, the websites that we've kind of spoken about, and we'll have all those links in our show notes, they really do help better explain the story. And this is so crucial. And we absolutely love the work that you do, the passion that you bring, your absolute, the Revive Our Reef, is looking at your graph, has been going for since 2012. So 13 years now. So it's a long time for something of this nature. So we absolutely love the work that you do. And to our listeners, we don't all have to be good speakers or good writers. If you're a creative in any way, that helps communicate science too, and in some respect even better. So, Shaun, thank you so much for firstly the amazing work that you do. You're an absolute legend as an advocate for the state of our waterways. And yes, we focus on the Hauraki Gulf, but I think a lot of these lessons can be applied anywhere in the world to our waterways. So a lot of important lessons there. Thank you so much for your passion. Thank you so much for coming onto the show and sharing your story.
Oh, thanks so much for having me. It's been lovely to chat with you guys. Thanks.